"You can't stop me from swimming here." That's what this entitled 20-year-old HOA brat screamed after I refused to let him use my private lake. I just spent $25,000 building this lake access, and this spoiled punk thought he owned it. When I told him no, he pulled out his phone and called 911, claiming I was threatening him. He thought the police would force me to let him swim whenever he wanted. Huge mistake. That false 911 call became the key that unlocked his family's downfall. By the end of this story, I didn't just refuse him access. I cut off his entire family's lake access forever. Echo Stories viewer, comment your location. Let me paint you a picture of where this all started. Rebecca and I had been living our dream life for 5 years in this gorgeous lakeside community. We're both in tech, working remotely, and we'd saved up for years to create our own little slice of paradise. The property came with about 50 feet of lakefront, but when we bought it, the access was just this muddy, overgrown path that barely qualified as walkable. We had big dreams though, and after 5 years of planning and saving, we finally pulled the trigger on what we called Project Paradise. $25,000 later, we transformed that muddy mess into something that looked like it belonged in a luxury resort magazine. We're talking about a custom teak deck, natural stone steps leading down to the water, a small dock for kayaking, and even a little outdoor shower area. The whole setup was absolutely stunning, and more importantly, it was built entirely on our property with our own hard-earned money. Now here's where things get interesting, and where I should have paid more attention to the warning signs. About 2 months before we finished our project, the community's only public lake access, this old wooden bridge that had been there for decades, finally gave up the ghost and collapsed completely. The HOA sent out notices saying it would take at least 6 months to get the permits and funding to rebuild it, which meant about 60 families in our neighborhood suddenly had no way to get to the lake. That's when I first noticed Victoria Blackwood taking a little too much interest in our construction project. Victoria was this self-appointed HOA president type, you know the kind. Always knew everyone's business before they did, always had an opinion about everything, and always seemed to be watching from her window whenever anything interesting happened in the neighborhood. Victoria had this son Jake, who was 20 years old and pretty much the poster child for everything wrong with entitled rich kids. This guy had dropped out of college after 1 semester, drove around in a brand new BMW convertible that his mom bought him, and spent most of his time at the gym taking selfies for his social media accounts. Jake had that particular brand of arrogance that only comes from never having to face real consequences for anything. He was tall, probably about 6'2", with perfectly styled hair and those expensive workout clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The kid had never worked a day in his life, but somehow always had money for the latest gadgets and designer everything. The day we finished our lakeside paradise, I was out there with Rebecca just admiring our work and feeling pretty damn proud of what we'd accomplished. The evening sun was hitting the water just right, and the whole setup looked like something you'd see in a home improvement show. We were talking about maybe having a little celebration dinner on the deck when I heard this car pulling up. Out steps Jake in his BMW, wearing designer swim trunks that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, and he's got this big grin on his face like he's about to deliver some great news. "Yo, Nathan," he called out, walking over like he owned the place. "Mom told me you guys built this sick setup for the community. This is absolutely perfect for my morning workout routine." He was looking around our property like he was already planning how to rearrange the furniture. "I've been looking for a good spot to do my water training, and this is exactly what I need. The lighting is perfect for filming content, too." I stood there for a second, honestly not sure if I'd heard him correctly. "Jake, I think there might be some confusion here. This is private property. Rebecca and I built this with our own money for our own use." I tried to keep my voice friendly, figuring this was just a simple misunderstanding that we could clear up quickly. But Jake just laughed and waved me off like I was telling him the sky was green. "Come on, man, don't be like that." Mom explained the whole situation to me. With the public access being down, this is basically the community replacement. She said you guys were cool with sharing. He pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of our deck setup. "This is going to look amazing in my content. I'm thinking 6 a.m. workouts, maybe some evening swimming sessions. Don't worry, I'll tag you guys when I post about it." That's when I realized Victoria had been planning this whole thing. She'd been watching us build our paradise, and the moment that public bridge collapsed, she'd decided our private property was the perfect solution to her son's problems. The audacity was breathtaking, but I kept my cool and tried to reason with him. "Jake, I understand the confusion, but this really is our private property. We've got the permits, the surveys, everything. We can't just let people use it as a public space." Jake's expression shifted from friendly to annoyed faster than I'd ever seen. Look, Nathan, I get that you're probably not used to sharing, but this is a community. We all live here together, and when someone builds something this nice, it's kind of expected that you'll be cool about letting neighbors use it. He gestured around like he was addressing a crowd. Besides, what are you even going to do with all this space? It's just you and Rebecca. I'll actually get some real use out of it. Before I could respond, Jake was already pulling out his phone again, but this time he was typing something. Within minutes, I got a text message from him that made my blood run cold. Chill out, old man. Mom says this is community property now. See you at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be here for my workout and swim session. Don't try to stop me. Will Jake actually show up at 6 a.m. tomorrow? What happens when an entitled 20-year-old meets an angry homeowner protecting his property? Drop a comment if you've ever dealt with neighbors who think they own your stuff. 6 a.m. came way too early, but I was already wide awake anyway. I'd barely slept, partly from anger and partly from disbelief that this kid actually thought he could just take over my property. Rebecca and I were having coffee in the kitchen when we heard it. Loud electronic music coming from outside. I looked out the window and nearly choked on my coffee. Jake was out there on my deck, setting up a full workout station complete with a portable speaker, yoga mats, resistance bands, and what looked like professional lighting equipment. The kid had turned my peaceful lakeside paradise into his personal gym and content creation studio. I threw on some clothes and stormed outside, with Rebecca right behind me. Jake, what the hell do you think you're doing? I called out, trying to keep my voice controlled but failing miserably. The music was so loud I was worried about waking up the entire neighborhood. Jake was in the middle of setting up his phone on a tripod, probably planning to film some kind of workout video on my property. Oh, hey Nathan, Jake said with this huge grin like nothing was wrong. Hope you don't mind the early start. I like to get my workout in before the sun gets too hot. This setup is absolutely perfect for my morning routine. He gestured around my deck like he was giving me a tour of his space. I've already got about 3,000 people following my fitness content, and this location is going to take it to the next level. The natural lighting with the water in the background is absolutely incredible. I felt my blood pressure spike. Jake, this is private property. You can't just set up shop here whenever you feel like it. This deck, this whole area, Rebecca and I paid for every single piece of it. I pointed to the property markers that were clearly visible. See those stakes? That's the property line. Everything inside those stakes belongs to us, not to the community. Jake's expression shifted from friendly to condescending in about half a second. Look, Nathan, I get that you're probably not used to sharing, but that's not really how communities work. When the public access goes down, people need alternatives. Mom explained that you guys built this specifically to help out while the HOA gets the main bridge fixed. He started doing some kind of stretching routine, clearly planning to ignore everything I was saying. Besides, what's the big deal? It's not like you're using it at 6 a.m. anyway. Rebecca stepped forward, and I could see she was getting just as angry as I was. Jake, your mother didn't explain anything to us because we never agreed to any of this. This isn't a community project. It's our private property that we built with our own money. Her voice was getting louder, and I could see neighbors starting to peek out their windows. You need to pack up your equipment and leave, now. That's when Jake did something that completely changed the game. He pulled out his phone and started recording us. Whoa, 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 he said, holding the phone up and making sure we were both in frame. I'm just trying to peacefully work out here, and you guys are getting super aggressive about it. This is supposed to be a community space while the main access is down. He was talking to his phone like he was broadcasting live to an audience. I'm just a guy trying to stay healthy, and these older folks are trying to gatekeep the entire lake. I realized what was happening. This kid was creating content out of our confrontation, probably planning to post it online to make us look like the bad guys. Jake, turn that camera off right now. You're trespassing on private property, and now you're recording us without permission. I stepped toward him, and that's when he made the move that would change everything. You know what? Jake said, lowering his phone but keeping it recording. I think I need to call the police. This guy is getting really aggressive with me, and I'm starting to feel threatened. He pulled up his phone's dialer and made a big show of calling 911 right there in front of us. Hello, 911. Yes, I need police assistance. There's a man here who's threatening me at the public lake access area. He's being very aggressive, and I'm concerned for my safety. I stood there absolutely stunned. This kid was calling the police on me, on my own property, while trespassing and recording everything. The sheer audacity of it was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. But Jake wasn't done yet. He kept talking to the emergency dispatcher, spinning this elaborate story about how he was just trying to peacefully exercise at a public area when this older, aggressive man started threatening him. "Yes, ma'am, I'm at the Lakeside Community Access Area. The man is probably in his 40s, and he's been very hostile since I arrived. I have video evidence of his aggressive behavior." Jake was looking directly at me while he talked, like he was challenging me to try to stop him. He's claiming this is private property, but everyone in the community knows this is the temporary access point while the main bridge is being repaired. Rebecca grabbed my arm, probably sensing that I was about to do something stupid. "Nathan, don't," she whispered. "Let him dig his own grave." But I was seeing red. This entitled little punk was standing on my property, using my electricity for his equipment, and now he was telling the police that I was threatening him. The whole phone call took about 3 minutes, but it felt like hours. Jake kept up his performance the entire time, occasionally looking at me with this smug expression, like he'd just played the perfect chess move. When he finally hung up, he smiled at me and said, "Officers should be here in about 10 minutes. Don't worry, Nathan, I'm sure we can clear this whole thing up once they get here and explain the situation." I wanted to grab his phone and throw it in the lake. I wanted to physically remove him from my property. But Rebecca was right. I needed to stay calm and let the truth speak for itself. "Jake, when the police get here, they're going to want to see property deeds, surveys, and permits. Do you have any of those?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't need permits to use community property," Jake replied, still setting up his workout equipment like nothing had happened. "Mom handles all that HOA stuff. She knows what's public and what's private." He started doing push-ups on my deck, like he was making a point about how comfortable he was there. Jake just called 911 on a live stream with thousands watching. What did Nathan just walk into? And why is Jake so confident the police will side with him? Comment your prediction. What do you think happens when the cops arrive? 2 police officers showed up about 15 minutes later, and I have to admit, I was actually relieved to see them. Finally, someone with authority could sort this mess out and get this kid off my property. The officers were professional and polite. One older guy who looked like he'd been doing this for years, and a younger officer who was probably pretty new to the force. Jake immediately went into full performance mode the moment they stepped out of their patrol car. "Officers, thank you so much for coming," Jake said, jogging over to meet them like he was greeting old friends. "I was just trying to do my morning workout routine here at the community lake access when this man started getting really aggressive with me. He pointed at me like I was some kind of dangerous criminal. He's been threatening me and trying to prevent me from using the public space. I have video evidence of his hostile behavior." The older officer looked around, taking in the scene, Jake's workout equipment spread across my deck, the obvious signs of recent construction, and me standing there looking like I was about to have a heart attack from pure frustration. "Sir, can you explain your side of the story?" he asked, looking at me with the kind of expression that said he'd dealt with neighborhood disputes before. I took a deep breath and tried to present my case as calmly as possible. "Officers, this is my private property. My wife and I built this entire setup with our own money on our own land. Here are the ownership papers, the property maps, and all the permits. I had grabbed the folder from inside when I saw the police car coming, and I handed over everything that proved this was private property. This young man showed up uninvited, set up his equipment, and when I asked him to leave, he called you guys and claimed I was threatening him." The younger officer took the papers and started looking through them, while the older one walked around the property, checking the boundary markers and looking at the setup we'd built. Jake kept trying to interrupt and explain his side, but the officers were focused on the actual evidence. After about 10 minutes of examining everything, the older officer came over to Jake with a pretty serious expression. "Son, this is clearly private property. These folks have all the proper documentation and your equipment is sitting on their privately owned deck." His voice was patient but firm. "Making false reports to 911 is a minor crime, and you could face charges for that. You need to pack up your things and leave this property immediately." Jake's confidence started to crack for the first time. "But officers, my mother told me this was community property. She's the HOA president and she knows all about the community access agreements." He was starting to sound desperate instead of smug. "There must be some kind of misunderstanding here. This is supposed to be the temporary access point while the main bridge is being repaired." The younger officer handed me back my papers and looked at Jake with the kind of expression that said he'd heard this excuse before. "Son, being misinformed doesn't change the law. This is private property and you're trespassing. Pack up your equipment and leave, or we'll have to arrest you for trespassing." That's when Victoria came running out of her house in her bathrobe, probably having watched the whole thing from her window. Officers, what's happening here? Why are you threatening my son?" She was out of breath and clearly panicked. Jake was just trying to use the community access area. Nathan, how could you call the police on a 20-year-old? The older officer turned to Victoria with a look that said he was getting tired of this whole situation. Ma'am, your son called us, not these folks. And he called with a false report about being threatened when he was actually trespassing on private property. He gestured toward all of Jake's equipment. Your son needs to remove his belongings and stay off this property or he'll be arrested. Victoria's face went through about 5 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. First confusion, then anger, then embarrassment, and finally this cold determination that made my skin crawl. There must be some mistake here. Jake has the right to use this area. Our community has rights. She was looking back and forth between the officers and me, like she was trying to figure out how to turn this situation around. But here's where things got really interesting. The older officer pulled me aside while his partner was making sure Jake packed up his equipment. Sir, I want you to know that we've had multiple calls from this address over the past year. Always unfounded complaints, always involving disputes with neighbors. He kept his voice low but made sure I could hear him clearly. You might want to document everything that happens going forward. People who make false reports once tend to make them again. That warning hit me like a cold slap in the face. Jake wasn't just some entitled kid making bad decisions. This was apparently a pattern of behavior. Victoria and Jake had been using the police as their personal dispute resolution service, and now I was their latest target. The officer's warning made it clear that this wasn't going to end here. After the officers left and Jake had packed up his equipment, Victoria stood in my driveway for a long moment, just staring at me. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was completely different from the panicked mother act she'd put on for the police. Nathan, you've made a huge mistake here. Jake has the right to use this area, and so does our community. You're going to regret calling the police on my son. Jake was loading his equipment into his BMW, but he stopped and looked at me with this expression that was part embarrassment and part pure hatred. This isn't over, old man. My mom has connections in this community that you don't even know about. You think you can just build something nice and keep it all to yourself, but that's not how this works. Neighbors are now questioning Nathan's character based on Jake's lies. With the whole community starting to turn against him, how will Nathan survive what's coming next? Here at Echo Stories, we love it when entitled people get what's coming to them. Comment below, Team Nathan or Team Jake? Within 24 hours, Jake's version of events had spread through the entire neighborhood like wildfire. I started getting text messages from neighbors asking if it was true that I'd called the police on a kid who was just trying to exercise. Victoria had apparently told everyone that Jake was peacefully working out at the community access area when I flew into a rage and had him arrested. The story got more dramatic with each retelling, and by the time it reached the far end of the neighborhood, I was apparently some kind of violent maniac who'd threatened a college student with a weapon. Rebecca and I were having dinner when we got the official notice from the HOA. Victoria had called an emergency meeting for the following evening, and the subject line made my stomach drop. Community discussion regarding private property use and community access rights. The message was professionally worded, but the subtext was clear. They were going to try to force me to share my property with the entire neighborhood. Hey there. The meeting was held at the community center, and when Rebecca and I walked in, I was shocked to see that nearly 60 people had shown up. The room was packed with neighbors I recognized and some I'd never seen before. Victoria had clearly made this into a much bigger deal than just a neighborhood dispute. She was standing at the front of the room with a microphone, and Jake was sitting in the front row, looking like he was about to give a performance. Victoria started the meeting with an elaborate presentation about community values and sharing resources during difficult times. We're here tonight because we're facing a crisis that affects all of us. The collapse of our main lake access has left 60 families without a way to enjoy the beautiful lake that drew us all to this neighborhood. She was working the room like a professional politician, making eye contact with different people and speaking with a tone that made everything sound reasonable and logical. Now we have a community member who has invested in a beautiful lakeside setup, and we're grateful for that investment. But in times of crisis, we need to come together as neighbors and share our resources. Victoria's voice got more passionate as she continued. What we're talking about here isn't just about property lines or legal technicalities. We're talking about the spirit of community, about being good neighbors, about thinking beyond our own individual needs. Jake stood up at that point, and I could see he'd prepared for this moment. I just want to say something to everyone here. I wasn't trying to cause any problems. I was just looking for a place to do my morning workout routine since our main access is down. His voice was humble and apologetic, completely different from the arrogant tone he'd used with me. I thought Mr. Nathan had built this setup to help out the community during this difficult time. I never meant to trespass or cause any issues. The room was eating it up. I could see people nodding along, and some of the older residents were looking at Jake with sympathetic expressions. One woman in the back called out, "Poor kid, he was just trying to exercise." Another person added, "It's not like he was trying to hurt anything." Victoria let the sympathy build for a moment before continuing. "Now I understand that Nathan and Rebecca have legal ownership of their property, and nobody is questioning that, but we're not talking about legal requirements here. We're talking about moral obligations. We're talking about what it means to be part of a community." She paused and looked directly at me. "When you live in a neighborhood like this, when you benefit from the community amenities and the property values that come from being part of a desirable area, you have responsibilities that go beyond just following the law." I could feel the mood in the room shifting against me, and I knew I had to say something. When Victoria opened the floor for comments, I stood up and tried to present my side as calmly as possible. "I appreciate everyone's concern about the lake access situation, and I sympathize with the inconvenience everyone is facing. But I need to clarify a few things." I looked around the room, trying to make eye contact with as many people as possible. Rebecca and I invested $25,000 of our own money into this project. We built it on our private property with our own savings. If someone gets hurt on our property, we're legally responsible. Our homeowner's insurance could be affected, and we could face personal liability. I took a breath and continued. "More importantly, Jake didn't just politely ask to use our property. He showed up uninvited, set up a complete workout station with loud music and filming equipment, and when I asked him to leave, he called 911 with false allegations. The police confirmed that he was trespassing and warned him about making false reports. But Jake was ready with a response. He stood up again, and this time his voice was shaking with emotion. "Mr. Nathan, I want to apologize if I handled this wrong. I really do." He looked around the room like he was addressing family members, "but I need everyone to understand something personal. After I dropped out of college last year, I went through a really tough time with depression. My doctor recommended exercise and outdoor activities as part of my recovery. Swimming and working out by the water have been the most important part of my healing process." The room went completely silent. Jake continued with tears in his eyes. "When our main access closed, I lost the one place that was helping me get better. When I saw the beautiful setup that Mr. Nathan built, I thought maybe there was hope again. I thought maybe our community could work together to help each other through this difficult time." He wiped his eyes and looked directly at me. "I never meant to break any laws or cause any problems. I just wanted to get healthy again." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This kid had just played the depression card in front of 60 neighbors, and I could see that it was working. People were looking at me like I was some kind of monster who'd tried to destroy a young person's mental health recovery. The sympathy in the room was palpable, and I realized that no matter what facts I presented, Jake had won the emotional argument. Victoria called for a community vote on whether the neighborhood should approach Nathan about sharing the lakeside access during the bridge repair period. The vote wasn't even close. Most people raised their hands in favor of asking me to share my property. Only a handful of people voted against it, and several people didn't vote at all. After the vote, Victoria stood up with this expression of satisfied determination. "Nathan, the community has spoken. We're not demanding anything, but we're asking you to be a good neighbor and consider allowing limited community access during this emergency period. You have 48 hours to think about it and let us know your decision." She looked around the room with this expression that said, she just achieved something important. If you decide you can't be part of the community solution, then we'll have to explore other options. As Rebecca and I walked out of that meeting, I felt like I'd just been publicly humiliated and threatened at the same time. Jake had managed to turn himself into the victim, Victoria had positioned herself as the reasonable community leader, and I was now the selfish neighbor who was keeping a depressed young man from his therapeutic swimming routine. The entire neighborhood just voted against Nathan. Victoria has given him 48 hours to surrender his property. But what if Nathan isn't as helpless as everyone thinks? Comment if you think Nathan should fight back or just give up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, thinking about how Jake had completely manipulated the entire room with his sob story about depression and recovery. Rebecca and I sat up until 2 a.m, trying to figure out what to do next. The worst part was that some of Jake's story might have actually been true, but that didn't give him the right to take over our property and lie to the police about it. "Nathan, there's something that's been bothering me about this whole situation," Rebecca said as we sat in our kitchen drinking coffee at midnight. "Victoria and Jake are way too confident about this. It's like they know something we don't." She was right. Throughout this entire ordeal, they'd acted like they had some kind of ace up their sleeve, some piece of information that would prove them right in the end. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Marcus Miller, a real estate attorney who'd helped us with some property issues when we first bought the house. "Marcus, I need your help with something. I've got neighbors who are trying to force me to share my private property, and I think there might be more to this story than what I'm seeing." Marcus listened to the whole story, taking notes and asking detailed questions about the timeline, the community access situation, and Victoria's role in the HOA. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Nathan, false 911 calls are serious business, but I think you're right that there's something deeper going on here. Let me dig into the property history and see what I can find. People don't get this aggressive about property rights unless they think they have some kind of legal standing." While Marcus was doing his research, I decided to take some defensive measures. I installed a complete security camera system around our property, $4,000 cameras with night vision, motion detection, and cloud storage. If Jake or anyone else decided to trespass again, I'd have video evidence of everything they did. The cameras turned out to be a brilliant investment because Jake showed up again that very night. The motion sensors woke me up at 1 in the morning, and I watched on my phone as Jake and 2 of his friends climbed over our fence and started using our lake access like it was their personal party spot. They brought beer, played music, and basically treated our property like their private resort. The cameras caught everything in crystal clear detail, including Jake saying to his friends, "The old man thinks he won, but Mom's got this whole thing figured out, just wait and see." That comment made my blood run cold. Jake wasn't just some entitled kid making bad decisions, he was part of a larger plan that Victoria had been orchestrating from the beginning. The cameras also caught them leaving trash, urinating in our outdoor shower, and damaging some of our landscaping. But most importantly, they caught Jake admitting that his mother had some kind of strategy for dealing with me. I sent all the footage to Marcus immediately, along with a detailed report of what had happened. His response came back within hours. "Nathan, this is perfect evidence of ongoing trespassing and property damage. But more importantly, that comment Jake made about his mother having a plan confirms my suspicions. I found something big in the property records, and I think you need to see this in person." We met at Marcus's office the next day, and what he showed me completely changed my understanding of the situation. "Nathan, I've been digging through 20 years of property records, HOA documents, and community agreements. Victoria has been more connected to your property than you realized." He spread out a collection of legal documents on his desk. Back in 2009, Victoria actually had a legitimate access agreement for the old lake access point. It was a formal legal document that gave her family specific rights to use a community path that ran along the shoreline. I stared at the documents, trying to understand what this meant. "But that's not our property, right? That's a completely different area." "Exactly," Marcus said, pointing to a map of the community. "The original access agreement was for a path that ran along the HOA's common property, about half a mile from your house. But here's the crucial part. The agreement had a very specific clause that said the access rights would be canceled if the family engaged in harassment or legal disputes with other community members." The implications hit me like a truck. So Jake's 911 call. Jake's false police report constitutes harassment and a legal dispute. According to the original agreement, that automatically cancels their access rights. Marcus was grinning now, clearly enjoying the irony of the situation. But wait, there's more. I also found records showing that Victoria's deck was built in 2019, and it extends over the property line onto the HOA common land. She never got permits for the expansion, and she's been essentially squatting on community property for 4 years. I felt like I was dreaming. So let me get this straight. Jake's attempt to seal our property rights actually caused them to lose their legitimate property rights? That's exactly right. And the illegal deck construction means they're currently in violation of HOA rules and city building codes. The current penalty for unauthorized construction on community property is a massive fine, plus they have to tear down the illegal portion of their deck. Marcus was clearly enjoying this turn of events. Victoria thought she was playing chess while you were playing checkers. But she didn't realize that her son's actions would trigger the cancellation clause in their original agreement. We spent the next 2 hours going through all the evidence and documentation. Marcus had found the original access agreement, the building permits for Victoria's deck expansion, the HOA rules about unauthorized construction, and the city codes that applied to the violation. Most importantly, he had Jake's own recorded admissions from the security cameras, plus the false police report, as evidence of harassment and legal disputes. So what are our options, I asked, still trying to process how completely the tables had turned. Marcus leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression. Victoria has two choices. She can drop all claims against you, publicly apologize for the harassment, and deal with the consequences of Jake's false police report and their illegal construction, or she can fight us in court and lose everything, their access rights, their deck, and potentially face criminal charges for the false reports. Jake thinks he's won by turning the whole neighborhood against Nathan, but what happens when that lawyer finds something that changes everything? What secret has Nathan's investigation uncovered? Echo Stories is about to blow your mind with what comes next. Drop your wildest guess about what the lawyer found. Marcus called me 2 days later with news that would change everything. Nathan, I need you to come to my office right away. What I've found is going to blow your mind, and I think we need to move fast before Victoria realizes what's happening. There was excitement in his voice that I'd never heard before, like he'd just uncovered buried treasure. When I arrived at his office, Marcus had documents spread across his conference table like he was preparing for a major court case. Nathan, sit down. What I'm about to show you is the legal equivalent of finding a nuclear weapon in your neighbor's backyard. He picked up a thick folder and opened it carefully. Remember how I told you that Victoria had legitimate lake access rights from an old agreement? Well, I found the original contract, and it's even more specific than I initially thought. He handed me a document that looked like it had been photocopied several times over the years. This is the original lake access agreement from 2009. Victoria's family was given specific rights to use a community path that led to the old lake access point. But look at this clause right here. He pointed to a section that was highlighted in yellow. The agreement states that access rights are immediately canceled if the family engages in harassment, legal disputes, or disruptive behavior toward other community members. I read the clause carefully, and the implications started to sink in. So Jake's 911 call, Jake's false police report doesn't just constitute harassment. It's a documented legal dispute with a community member. The moment he made that call, he automatically canceled his family's access rights. Marcus was practically glowing with satisfaction. But that's not even the best part. Look at this. He pulled out another set of documents, these ones more recent. I did a complete survey of Victoria's property using city records and satellite imagery. Her deck expansion from 2019? It's not just a little bit over the property line, it's a massive encroachment onto HOA common land. He showed me an aerial photograph with property lines clearly marked. The Victoria's deck extends over the property line by a significant amount. She built it without any permits, without HOA approval, and without even bothering to check where her property actually ended. The photograph made it clear just how significant the violation was. Victoria's deck wasn't just slightly over the line. It was a major encroachment that had been going on for years. What does this mean legally? Under current city codes and HOA rules, unauthorized construction on community property carries a huge fine, plus mandatory removal of the illegal structure. But here's the really beautiful part. Since Victoria has been using HOA land without permission for 4 years, she also owes back payments for the land use. Marcus was clearly enjoying explaining this. The total cost could be more than the value of her house. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He pulled out the security camera footage from Jake's midnight party on our property. And this video evidence shows ongoing trespassing, property damage, and most importantly, Jake's admission that his mother has been planning this whole thing. Watch this part right here. He played the section where Jake told his friends that his mom had everything figured out. That's evidence of premeditation. Victoria and Jake didn't just stumble into this situation, they planned it. I watched the footage again, focusing on Jake's confident attitude and his casual admission that Victoria had some kind of strategy. It was clear that they'd been planning to take over our property from the moment the public access bridge collapsed. So what Victoria told the HOA meeting about community values and sharing resources? It was complete nonsense. She was trying to manipulate the community into pressuring you to give up your property rights so her family could have private access to the lake. Marcus collected all the documents and put them back in order. Victoria thought she was being clever, but she made a critical mistake. She assumed that her old access agreement would protect her no matter what Jake did. She didn't realize that Jake's behavior would actually cancel their legitimate rights. The evidence was overwhelming. We had the original access agreement with its specific cancellation clause, documentation of the illegal deck construction, video evidence of ongoing trespassing, and Jake's own recorded admissions. But Marcus had saved the best for last. Nathan, there's one more thing. I contacted the city planning department about Victoria's deck violation, and they're very interested in pursuing this case. Apparently, Victoria isn't the only person in this community who's been building without permits. He pulled out a letter from the city planning office. They're planning to do a comprehensive review of all recent construction in your neighborhood, and Victoria's violation is going to be their first example. The letter was official city correspondence, explaining that they'd received a complaint about unauthorized construction and were opening a formal investigation. The potential penalties were staggering: fines, mandatory removal of the illegal structure, and possible criminal charges for willful violation of building codes. So, what are our options? I asked, still trying to process how completely the situation had changed. Marcus leaned forward with the expression of a lawyer who is about to deliver the final blow. We can offer Victoria a choice. Option 1. She drops all claims against your property, issues a public apology to the community for misleading them, removes the illegal portion of her deck, and accepts the cancellation of her family's lake access rights. Option 2, we take this to court, where she'll lose everything anyway, plus face criminal charges for Jake's false police reports and potential fraud charges for the illegal construction. The beauty of the situation was that Victoria had created her own downfall. Her attempt to manipulate the community and pressure me into giving up my property rights had backfired spectacularly. Jake's arrogance and false police report had cost them their legitimate lake access. The illegal deck construction had put them in violation of city codes and HOA rules, and the security camera footage proved that they'd been trespassing and planning this whole thing from the beginning. There's one more detail that makes this perfect, Marcus said with a grin. Remember how the community voted to pressure you into sharing your property? Well, once the HOA learns about Victoria's illegal construction and the cancellation of her access rights, they're going to be very interested in distancing themselves from her. Nobody wants to be associated with someone who's been violating community rules for years. I realized that Victoria's greatest strength, her influence in the community, was about to become her greatest weakness. When the neighbors learned that she'd been lying about her own property rights while pressuring me to give up mine, the community support for Jake would evaporate overnight. Jake's 911 call didn't just backfire, it triggered a legal nuclear bomb that's about to destroy his family's lake access forever. But will Victoria figure out what's happening before it's too late? Comment your reaction to this plot twist. Did you see this coming? The final confrontation was scheduled for Tuesday evening at the community center. This time, though, the energy was different. Marcus had sent legal notices to Victoria, the HOA board, and the city planning department. Everyone in the room knew this wasn't just another neighborhood squabble. It was about legal violations, property rights, and consequences. When Rebecca and I arrived, the crowd was a fraction of what it had been before. About 20 neighbors sat scattered in folding chairs, and most of them looked uncomfortable. Gone were the angry faces shouting about community safety. Victoria sat at the front table with a lawyer beside her, looking less confident than usual. Her son Jake slouched in his seat, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Marcus stood and calmly addressed the room. Thank you all for attending. I'm here to present facts related to the Blackwood family's lake access, construction violations, and actions that affect this community. He projected the 2009 lake access agreement onto the screen. The Blackwoods were granted access under this agreement, but it includes a clause that voids access if the family engages in harassment or legal disputes with neighbors. He highlighted the line in bold. Jake Blackwood made a false 911 call, claiming he was being threatened while trespassing. Police confirmed the call was false. That incident constitutes harassment and a legal dispute, meaning the agreement is no longer valid. The room went quiet. Some neighbors shifted in their seats, avoiding Victoria's eyes. Marcus pressed forward. Additionally, the Blackwoods constructed a deck in 2019 that extends onto HOA-owned land. No permits were filed. This is a violation of city building codes and HOA regulations. The deck has been occupying community property for 4 years illegally. He showed aerial photos with property lines clearly marked, including a highlighted section showing how far the deck extended past their lot. Victoria's lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but Marcus continued. Security footage also shows Jake trespassing repeatedly on private property. We have audio of him telling his friends that this was all part of a plan his mother had in place. This proves the harassment was not accidental, it was coordinated. He played a short clip of Jake laughing and saying, "Don't worry, my mom's got this figured out." By now, the HOA board members were exchanging nervous glances. One older woman on the board stood up. "Victoria, is this true? Were you building illegally and lying to us about the access point?" Victoria hesitated, her composure visibly cracking. "We'll need time to review the documents. These are complicated issues." But her voice was trembling. The people who had once defended her were now looking at her with suspicion. Jake finally spoke. His voice wasn't angry or cocky like before. It was confused and almost pleading. "You told me we had a right to use that dock. You said Nathan was being unreasonable. I didn't know there were rules or agreements. I just wanted a place to swim." He looked genuinely betrayed. In that moment, it became obvious that he wasn't the mastermind. He was just a pawn. Marcus delivered the final blow with calm precision. Victoria has two options. Option 1, acknowledge that lake access rights have been voided, apologize to the community, remove the illegal deck extension, and pay the fines. Option 2, challenge this in court and face loss of access, heavier penalties, and possible criminal charges for filing a false report. The silence in the room was sharp. Victoria's lawyer whispered to her again. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "We'll accept option 1, she said, her voice barely audible. "Jake will stay off Nathan's property and we'll work with the city and HOA to resolve the deck issue." But I wasn't going to let her wrap this up with one vague apology. I stood. Let's make something clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Jake trespassed and made a false emergency call. Victoria used that lie to manipulate the HOA and try to take part of my land. She built illegally, lied about her intentions, and used her son's situation to gain sympathy and pressured the rest of you into backing her. I looked directly at the board. That's not community leadership. That's calculated exploitation. Victoria's expression collapsed entirely. She looked around the room, hoping for support, but no one came to her defense. Her voice cracked as she tried to speak. "I just wanted Jake to have a place where he could feel better. He's been struggling, and when the old lake access collapsed, I thought maybe we could find a solution." There were tears in her eyes now. "I didn't mean for it to turn into this." "But you never asked," I said firmly. "You just took. And when I didn't give in, you tried to ruin my reputation and steal my rights." The older board member who had spoken earlier stood again. "Victoria, I think it's best you step down from all HOA leadership positions until this is resolved. We can't have board members actively violating city laws and manipulating residents." The rest of the board nodded in agreement. 3 weeks later, Victoria had removed the illegal deck extension and paid several $1,000s in fines. She issued a written apology that was mailed to every household in the HOA. Jake got a part-time job with a local landscaping company, maybe a small step toward taking responsibility for himself. And I had an 8-foot privacy fence installed around my entire property. Not out of anger, but as a clear message, this land is mine. This time, there will be no confusion, no backroom pressure, no more HOA power games. Justice wasn't about humiliating Victoria. It was about restoring balance, telling the truth, and reminding people that even in a suburban cul-de-sac, you don't get to rewrite the rules just because you're loud, connected, or entitled. You ask, you earn, or you stay behind the fence. If this story taught you something about standing up for your rights, smash that like button. And if you're feeling generous and want to support more stories like this one, there's a tip jar in the description. Every little bit helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and make sure to check out the other wild HOA battles right here on the channel. Trust me, you won't believe what some of these neighbors tried to pull.